Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show, and we have Liam Martin, co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Time Doctor, the Running Remote Conference, and Staff.com. He's back on with us for part 2 of our interview with him, and today he's going to talk about those companies. So, Liam, welcome back to the Work From Home
episode
Show.
Too.
Oh, you're drunk on this episode? Awesome.
Drunk,
man.
sure. Yeah.
That's 2 days in a row.
Hey, whenever you work from home, you can do what you want.
Yeah.
You know, that is the reality. We have a lot of, so we're data nerds, particularly on the Time Doctor side, and I connect an Oura ring up to my Time Doctor. An Oura ring is basically just like a Fitbit, but it collects a lot of much more precise data points. So it also collects blood pressure, your systolic data points, all this kind of stuff. And it also measures, it basically suggests your how drunk you are at any point. And so I've tied that data back inside of Time Doctor to be able to see whether or not my drinking, my sleep patterns, all that kind of stuff impact my overall productivity. So far, there's interesting data, nothing that is really definitive yet. I need to really collect like 6 months of data to come up with some really clear insights, but there's some cool stuff that's popping up.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your companies.
Sure.
Time Doctor. What is Time Doctor? What does it offer its clients and customers, and how can our listeners utilize it?
Sure. So Time Doctor is a time tracking tool, particularly for remote workers. It was born out of my problem not being able to adequately measure how long someone that worked remotely for me completed a particular task. So I used to run a tutoring company, and we had this issue of someone would bill me for 10 hours, but then the client would say they only worked with me for 5 hours. I'd have to end up actually refunding the client and then paying the tutor the full amount. So this was really difficult, and we had other tools that were trying to solve that problem. But to be completely honest with you, a lot of those tools weren't really useful in that context. We can kind of get into like Upwork and before that Odesk and Elance in that industry and how that kind of applied to building out Time Doctor itself. But a lot of the times you couldn't actually measure that data properly, and it couldn't be audited properly. So Time Doctor is a tool that not only measures how long a particular task took, but it measures all of the different metadata connected to that. So what websites you're going to while you're completing that task and what applications you're using. And with that, you're able to, number one, audit that task so that you know exactly how long that particular task took, if you're an agency as an example. And then secondarily, which is the part that we like a lot more, is you can gain insights into productivity. So we can tell you, as an example, should you work differently from the way that you're currently working? What specific actions could you take? Should you be spending 10% less time on email to be able to boost your productivity numbers? Or should you be working less? The general answer is yes. Our data shows very clearly that something like a 4-day work week is way more productive. Like you get more stuff done in 4 days than you do in 5, which sounds very counterintuitive, but we're analyzing basically deep insights into work and trying to figure out how to truly make people more productive.
Yeah, when you dangle that carrot, it's amazing what happens to productivity. Now, you mentioned checking this in by kind of hour by hour. How much do you manage how much your full-time workers work? Like if you're on salary, do you actually still use Time Doctor on them, or do you just say, as long as you get your job done, I don't care?
So internally, everyone uses the tool. We don't care how many hours you log. And also everyone sees everyone else's data. So I'm currently doing podcast as a task, as an example, and anyone that wants to see my data internally can see exactly that I'm working on a podcast.
And they'll see you're crushing it.
In the evening. Yeah. And so that's, but we don't necessarily hold people to particular hours. And the reason being is we actually want as much freedom of direction as humanly possible. And when we look at, we have hundreds of thousands of people that use our software every single day, and you can start to develop some very interesting insights into the data. We've seen generally about 3 hours of work, quote unquote, is pretty much the most that you can get done in a day before you start to really slow down. And I'm talking about thought workers, right? So people that are just trying to solve really complex problems. I'm not talking about someone who is a customer support rep, as an example. However, there is a significant drop off after around the 3 hour mark, where your tickets will get a lot less precise, or the time to a completed ticket will actually get a lot slower after about 3 hours of hardcore work with your breaks worked in. So we like people to just sort of do their own thing and then see the data and get the insights from it.
Yeah. Now, talking about the Running Remote conference, tell us, how old is it? Are you having a conference this year? Is it a remote conference? It's called the Running Remote conference. It should probably be a remote conference.
That is a kettle of fish, my man. Yeah, if you want to get into that. So we were supposed to run the conference April 20th to 21st in Austin, Texas. And the last 2 years we had run it in Bali. And we ended up having to postpone the conference, unfortunately, like everyone else. We ran an online conference instead, actually, which was great. We had about 4,000 signups for it. A couple thousand people showed up. And we're going to continue to run online. And I think that we also lost, depended upon how you slice it, between 150 and 250,000 for that conference, which was obviously a bit of a kick in the teeth. But for us, that happened to everybody. When you look at the event industry now, it's 95% melted. And it's just over.
It's getting to the point of what event industry?
Yeah, we're realizing the only avenue that we really have, which is great for us because we talk about remote work, is running it online. But like anything else, we do a company retreat every single year. Just because you're working remotely doesn't mean you don't need to meet in person. That does energize everyone. And we want to be able to get back to running an in-person event. We're planning on doing it, obviously, once we can, but the virus is generally dictating when we have that event, not our own dates.
But you said that you had 4,000 people attend the online event?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you had a physical in-person event, my guess is you would have been limited by space to maybe 400 people.
Yeah, I think we were expecting about 1,000 people for the last one. So we're probably, we actually do think that running an online component of the physical event in the future is going to be a part of what we do. Yeah. Everyone enjoyed it so much that I think we're going to continue on with that. But to be completely honest with you, sponsors don't really want to pay for a physical event.
That was your model.
A virtual event. And that may change, right, in the future. Maybe we're not going, maybe this vaccine is not happening. Maybe we've just got to figure out how to live with the virus. I sure hope that that's not the case. But
so that was the business model.
Different. Pardon?
You went with the sponsorship business model. I'm assuming you also maybe you lowered the price of the tickets for the online version, but you were heavily dependent on sponsors.
So we're very open. We actually give out our P&L at the end of each year. The first year that we ran Running Remote, we had Joel Gascoigne, who's the CEO of Buffer, speak at the conference, and we were inspired by him to be able to disclose everything. So if you go to youtube.com/runningremote, our P&Ls are there. And the video of me explaining all the costs and all that kind of stuff are there. So you can go and check that out. But it's, on our part, the reality of a conference, a big conference of more than 1,000 people, is the majority of that income is dependent upon sponsorships. And that's something that I didn't actually recognize at the beginning of this process of trying to figure out how to run a conference. I was very excited about the idea. My co-founder, Rob, said I wouldn't have 20 people come, which is exactly what I needed to get super angry and prove to him that I could get a whole bunch of people to come. And so I said, fine, I'm going to cut a check. And we cut $100,000 check for the venue and the food and all this kind of stuff. And then I tried to fill that up. And that initial year, we were probably 80% attendees revenue and 20% sponsorship. And then the next year, we were probably about 70% sponsorship and 30% attendee. And that's a much more profitable mix. If you're getting into conferences, it's not about the attendees, unfortunately. It's about the sponsors. Get the sponsors in, and then everything else will work out after that.
So I find it interesting you talked about how the Running Remote conference had a physical presence. What role do you see physical offices taking in the future? I mean, you say you like to get together for retreats. What do you see a role for a lot of office space, or is it just you think people are going to meet together for retreats and maybe a conference once a year?
I think that co-working is going to 10x after the vaccine is over. So we used to have a whole bunch of what we call crash pads in the company. We actually did get rid of quite a few of them. But if you have more than 4 people in a city, you were able to open up a co-working space office or your own office. And obviously all those locations are shut down now due to the virus. But I think that there's going to be a huge resurgence of co-working, co-living. People want that type of access, but they don't want to be like, what if you could choose your office, right? What if your office wasn't just assigned to you because you unfortunately worked at this company and you really liked the work, but everyone in the office were massive assholes? Well, you can still work at that company. You can still get really good work done, but you can choose your office. You can choose your coworkers. And I think that's what's going to happen with co-working is right now they're melted just as much as events. But after the virus is over, there's going to be a massive resurgence because we're going to see, 2018, we were at 4% full-time remote work in the United States. By our estimates, we're floating around 60% right now in the United States. And I would say arguably at least half of those people are not going back. So we're going to see a huge, huge pulse of people that are really excited about jumping into a co-working space.
Yeah, I've been telling the people I know that I think WeWork was about 4 or 5 years too early, and that after this, the WeWork model is going to take off because people are going to want
$4 billion overvalued.
Yeah, well, there's that detail too. What aspect of Time Doctor do you think provides the most value to people whenever they come? Like, what do you hear back from your clients that has been the most useful to them?
So on the employer side, it's really saying, I can tell you very clearly on the corporate side, the number one reason someone will not deploy a remote work agreement is because they're saying, well, how do I know how productive they are if they're not in the office? And so we kind of see ourselves as the Trojan horse of remote work, very pragmatically saying, we're going to solve that problem for you. And then that person will have the freedom to be able to travel or to be able to do what they want or to be able to spend more time with their kids. Because a lot of the times remote work is encapsulated inside of the tech startup world, which is obviously where it has the highest adoption. But that's 1% of the story. The other 99% are the people that work at Dell or the call center rep. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people, and I've had other friends of ours that have seen millions of people go remote inside of their companies within days. And this is something that for me is, they're not the people that are the typical tech startup people. They're the people that don't know how to use Zoom or Slack or any of these types of technologies that we really know quite well. And providing them the opportunity to be able to get out of the office is really my clear goal, regardless of whether or not it's basically trying to figure out how do you keep the employer and employee, and particularly the employer, happy enough to be able to pull the trigger on this. And Time Doctor is by far the most pragmatic tool in the corporate space to be able to make that happen.
And now cycling back to, switching gears a little bit, going back to the Running Remote conference. I mean, it seems like people just hear, hey, you should work remotely. What are the conferences, if somebody next year, if there's actually a physical conference, what do people get from going to the conference? I guess kind of what's the overarching and kind of themes every year? Like why should people go?
So very clearly, it's not for employees, it's for employers. So if you manage people, if you're an HR director, or if you're a founder, you should be going to Running Remote. If you're a digital nomad or if you're a remote worker, go to DNX, go to DMSS, go to there's like a dozen different conferences for the digital nomad remote worker side. That's not what we do. So it's basically, how do you scale a remote team? And it's actually a lot easier than that in terms of getting a taste of it. If you just go to youtube.com/running remote, we publish all the talks for free. So we put them all up. And if you want to be able to consume that content, there's like probably right now over 100 talks that are up there, and just choose a direction and go. But it's very much focused on, last year as an example, we had the director of support for Shopify, and she went from 0 to 3,000 remote support reps in 2 years with Shopify. A lot of people don't really know this, is that Shopify actually already was pretty much remote before they declared they're officially remote basically this week. So how do you do that? What's the process? How do you build a team that quickly? What are the operational processes that are associated with it? All of this stuff is super interesting stuff to a remote work guy like me, because what I'm trying to figure out is, well, how do I go from 100 to 200 people? Or how do I go from 200 to 500 people? There are steps, there are processes that you need to be able to deploy, and that's what we teach at the conference.
Great. Well, Liam, any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners when it comes to remote work or working from home?
Right now is probably the greatest time for remote work in the last 15 years that I've been working remotely. And also, it's going to be the largest shift in labor since the Industrial Revolution. So if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already have an inkling towards that, but the economy is obviously not doing well, and it's going to get worse. There is so much work to be done inside of the remote work world right now. You just need to choose a direction and go. And there are jobs, there are tools that need to be built. For anyone that's listening, just do something, and you're going to be just fine inside of this economy. I can't stress that enough, because those opportunities are there. And if I can inspire at least one person to be able to kind of get out of their rut and jump into something that may completely change their lives, remote work is one of the easiest ways to do it.
Awesome. Well, Liam, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. You're the co-founder and CMO of Time Doctor, the Running Remote Conference, and Staff.com. We've touched on all three companies over the course of the past two episodes. The websites are runningremote.com, Staff.com, and TimeDoctor.com. Liam, Martin, thanks so much once again for joining us on the Work From Home Show. We wish you all the best.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and to all our listeners out there, workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions for Liam, send us an email, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. We'll make sure that question gets to him, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. At workfromhomeshow.com, you can find all of our previous episodes and get all sorts of free stuff that we're offering. So until next time, keep on working from home.